Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast.
Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Katie.
Katie, are you pumped for 2025? I'm so excited.
I am excited too for many reasons. One of them being that 2024 has been such a rodeo, so many highs, so many lows, that I'm looking for just like an even-keeled, pretty chill, fun year, which I'm sure means it will be even more of a rodeo than 2024 has been.
But boring is good, right? You're aiming for boring, right?
I know. When I start to crave Tech 50s and Zwift, I know that I need boring. Like, that's exactly what I want. I want no excitement, nothing at all.
Oh my gosh. When you say you're enjoying swimming, I'm concerned.
Well, I'll jump into this later. I was enjoying swimming, and I talked last week on the podcast about how I'm consistent back in the water. But then I actually just had a gum surgery, like a periodontal procedure the other day, and now I can't swim. So my swim streak is over. It was nice while it lasted for 2 swims over 2 weeks. And now I'm just on Zwift. So we will talk about that later. But yeah, I'm trying to have some compassion for that whole experience.
That's right. That's right. Well, should we jump into coaching and training insights?
Yes, I think we should. But before we do that, I just wanted to have a little bit of a broader reflection because we have passed, I think, the threshold of 1 year of the podcast. So it was just about a year ago that we released our first episode. And here we are now. We're still kicking. And I'm just grateful to be here. So thanks so much for doing this with me. And thank you so much to all of our listeners. This has really been like a community created project. We all have learned so much from our athletes. We've learned from our friends. We've learned from each other. And I'm just glad that we've been able to turn something out. So please keep listening. Please share it. Please like it. I think there's ways to do that on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Give us a rating, give us a review. But yeah, just thank you so much to all of our listeners. This is a pretty big milestone.
This is a big milestone. Wow. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah. This has been terrific. And I think this is reflecting back on it. Well, first of all, this is like episode 60. And as we all know, there's 52 weeks in the year. So which basically says you're an overachiever and you managed to put out a bunch of other additional podcasts. So congratulations. You've been with all of them. So yes, so we're week 52, but episode 60. So if you could figure that one out.
I know. Yeah. There was a short time we were releasing 2 a week and I almost did not survive those weeks. So we figured out what's manageable. But yeah, I mean, the reason we keep releasing them is because people seem to appreciate it. And I think because we keep learning a lot. So that's what we're here for.
I just, I'm so appreciative. Yeah. Of the conversation that we have with ourselves and then between coaches and then with our community. And I think this is definitely the single most best thing I've ever done in terms of coaching, in terms of this podcast. Cause it just, every day I'm writing something down and saying, okay, oh, I thought about this, or I thought about that. And we always joke about there being content, but what I'm really saying is that there's clarity in being organized and writing things down. And then having to explain ourselves in a public forum is a big clarity drug. So I just appreciate doing this with you and Elena and our community and Kevin. It's been phenomenal. And I'm looking forward to 2025, more podcasts.
Yeah, I absolutely am too. And I think too, the accountability piece has been awesome for me. I really feel this draw to practice what I preach more than I ever have before, even when I'm like, damn it, did I really say that on the podcast? And now I have to ground in the intention of the workout or whatever it is. But it's been amazing, I think, for us as athletes, not just as coaches, kind of develop. And then probably our biggest goal too is just developing as people. So thank you to everyone for kind of helping us do that. And I don't know, after that Moshi Goshi piece, maybe we should just jump into coaching and training insights.
Let's do a little gratitude and then coaching and training insights. Let's go.
I love it. Best way to start a podcast. Okay, quick ones this week. So first one for me is thinking about people kind of getting back on Zwift. It is Zwiftmas is here. It's totally the season to be on your trainer. And I've gotten some questions about kind of the intention of the workout when we're on Zwift. So most of our workouts happening for people who are in their earliest part of base season right now are all kind of Z1, Z2 type things. And I just wanted to put it out there that it is totally okay to do either a structured zone 1-2 workout or to just free ride on Zwift. And that's something that we didn't really do too much in the past, but I think I've done a lot more in recent years is just like go out, pick a course, pick one that looks fun, somewhere random that you want to ride in the Zwift world, and then just see how that feels. And I find that can give you a little bit of a better kind of realistic feel of riding inside as compared to a structured workout where the power is going to be very controlled. But I want people to have a lot of choice during this time of year. So the broader advice is just like pick something that keeps your heart rate in zone 2. It's fine if it's structured. If it's fine if it's not. It's fine if you get a random day where you actually could go outside. But the intention of the workout right now is zone 2, and there's a million different ways to get there.
Yeah, I love this one. And yeah, I always feel pressure as a coach to, put in, you got to put in a workout, right? A zone 2 workout. And we have tons of workouts. We have 350 Zwift workouts. So I always feel pressure, but honestly, and I've said this many times before, is that if you just get on your trainer, it's like getting the pool, like get the pool, get wet, you get the win. And I think same thing with trainer, because the trainer is so effective because there's such constant tension on your legs. And literally if you just got on your trainer and just did 80% of like zone 1, zone 2, mix it up with some low cadence, high cadence, and then did the 20% of medium or high, or did some Zwift races, you'd come out in the spring just great. So like you say, there's many roads to Rome here. And if you look at a workout and say, oh, I don't really want to do a structured workout, yeah, just jump on something and just go for it. But I have to admit, so I have been on Zwift a little bit, and I rarely do workouts, but I noticed the other day that I was putting on some hillier workouts, and I was like, wow, my trainer's not responding to the hills. And I'm like, what's going on? So I'm now on this quest to figure out why my little icon on Zwift actually responds to the watts I'm putting out and actually slows down on the hills. But yet my resistance on my snap is not working. And so I keep changing something every single day, and I still haven't figured out exactly what I'm doing. So right now I basically have a smart trainer, but it's kind of like a dumb trainer. So I've like gone way, way back in time, and I'm literally I'm just changing gears, and I'm just looking at my power meter, and I'm just doing some high stuff, high cadence, low cadence stuff. Every once in a while I'll crank it back up again. Sometimes I'll stand up. So I've just gone totally old school until I can figure out the whole Zwift thing. But the point is, like, I'm still getting in shape. I'm still maintaining, and I'm getting that good work in because of the constant tension on the legs.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, when we say that there are many roads to Rome, that's one of them, right? Like, it's get on a dumb trainer. Or if you have a Peloton bike right now and you don't want to invest in a smart trainer right now, like, great. It's just zone 1, 2 base work. So there will be later times where we're like, hey, it's really important that you do this workout just the way that it is. But that is not one of those times. So just keep listening to the pod, and we'll tell you when things have shifted. And it's really important to nail your smart trainer and nail your sweet spot and do your bike workout outside. We'll let you know.
I used to have such a jaundiced view of Peloton, and now I think it's a really powerful tool for a lot of people, because people they have it, right? So we always say the best bike is the bike you own. A lot of people just own Pelotons, so that's fantastic. And then there's also like all this other stuff on Peloton. I think like there's strength work, and there's mindfulness stuff, and so I'm getting people saying in their training piece, oh, I did a little Peloton this and Peloton that extra content. So I don't know, shout out to Peloton, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I have to quick shout out to Bruce Clayton, one of our favorite people to mention on the podcast, my dad, because he's big into Peloton, and he is very flexible now and does a lot of yoga. So we love that. Get people active. Shout out to Dad. I appreciate he showed me his squat form is really good recently. So yeah, it's been great.
Go Brew.
Okay, next insight for me, another quick one, just thinking about in the base season, it is very much fine to substitute in different activities now that our focus is just Z1, 2. So people will say like, hey, like it just snowed. I mean, there was recently snow in Neighbor Valley. Could I go for a cross-country ski instead of, a 30-minute cross-country ski instead of a 30-minute easy run? That's totally fine. Or do a 30-minute hike or a 30-minute elliptical, whatever it is. You do want to get some of your primary sport in, and you can't necessarily hike your entire way to a run race. But occasional swaps like that are totally fine and are actually encouraged. I think it's important for us to start kind of learning our bodies, learning what we want in a given day, and to feel excited. Because if you're starting out right now and you don't feel excited or you feel burnt out, it is not going to be good when things hit April, May, and you have really, really massive workouts that you need to get done. So do substitute whenever you want to, and ask your coach for help if you're not sure how to do that.
And I think we're coming up to the season where lots of folks ask, is downhill skiing a substitute for a bike workout or a run workout or strength workout? So we'll cover that every year. So what's our standard line on that one?
Oh, yeah. Well, so I feel like we evolved on this a little bit, but I think where we settled somewhere towards the middle of ski season last year, so many people maybe haven't heard this in a little while, is that skiing is stress on the body. You could sub it for like a strength workout, and it can be an endurance workout too, depending on how much you're skiing, but it's something that you can't do as every single workout in your build. So if you go out, maybe put some TSS in. Did we have a TSS calculation on that? I think it was something like 20 to 25 per hour or something, since you're doing downhill type, or you're doing some chairlift type stuff. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, maybe we need a whole episode on like how to make downhill skiing part of your triathlon training, because everyone wants to know. But the point is, it's a load. Don't assume that you're going to do a bunch of other hard stuff on that same day. And you're getting some adaptation, though you still need to swim, bike, run as part of your build.
Yeah, I've had some athletes already say, hey, I've got a ski vacation coming up. I've got 2 ski vacations coming up this year. How am I going to fit stuff in? And I'm like, we're not. You're going to go ski. You're going to spend all day outside. You're going to get completely exhausted because you're basically working on your outdoor durability. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to go back inside at night and eat like, French fries with like Velveeta cheese on it and stuff and drink a beer and get up and do the next wave, like, and have a great time. Like, it's fantastic. Like, you'll be getting some exercise, you're getting some durability, and you'll be getting some social time. Like, that's a win. And that's a great break from swim, bike, run, because it is a long season.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like that's actually probably one of our lessons from 2024. We did not put that in the specific main content, which I am telling everyone right now is all about lessons from 2024, but it's that we changed our mind on skiing. You should go do it. It's fun. It's exercise, etc. And I think that's an evolution that has happened in a lot of our workout domains. There are key principles that are really, really important. And at the same time, there are so many roads to Rome. So we'll talk about that a little bit kind of going on, but skiing is absolutely one of them. And anyone who is going skiing, especially over the holidays, have fun. Be safe. I hope the East Coast treats you to something good or that you're going somewhere better than the East Coast, if not. And yeah, just enjoy the skis. Okay, so my last insight here, this is evidence piece number 900, that strength training is a hack. So in the beginning of this episode, I said briefly that I had this gum surgery happen, which it sort of has felt like a when it rains, it pours several weeks for me because I had an ankle injury and death in the family. And then it's been a lot of inconsistency, a lot of rest. And now I had this gum surgery. So all this is to say I've had relatively low volume in the last 6 weeks. The good thing is I'm allowed to be on Zwift as much as I want. I just probably shouldn't be like swimming and running a bunch for a couple more days. And I've actually been surprised to see that even though I haven't had a ton of volume, my power has looked really good. My heart rate's been nice and low for some pretty solid numbers and like Z1, 2. And my hunch is that the reason this has worked out is because of the one thing I have been really consistent with is my strength training. So I took the mindset of, if I can get nothing done, if I could only get 2 workouts in a week, those would be 2 quality hours of heavy lifting. And I think with the nature of my life in a city, I also walk quite a bit. So it's honestly been just like a bunch of walking and a bunch of strength training and then mixing in a little bit of swim, bike, run whenever I can. And it's so cool to see that even with that little volume compared to really any other time in my life, I still have some good bike fitness happening. So we surmised that maybe there was going to be something good happening with, bike fitness as a result of heavy lifting, but I'm already starting to see that happen in real time. So my advice is if you are strapped for time, don't skip your strength. Strength should be the number one thing that stays. I think it's the best way to maintain fitness if you already have a base. And then the road to returning to fitness won't be as long if you have to take a little bit of a break for something.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there a particular, like, how did you know, like, oh, my numbers are good? Like, were you just seeing it as like in a regular zone 2, or were you climbing like mountain route or something? What sort of keyed you off to like, oh, wow, this is good?
Yeah. So for me, this is something I think I mentioned a long time ago on the podcast, but I often look at the difference between my heart rate and my power. So for example, if I feel like I'm not in good bike fitness, for example, my heart rate will be really high and there will be a smaller gap between my average heart rate and my average power. But I know that for me, if there's a gap that's about like 30 to 35 between my average heart rate and my average power, that's like pretty good bike fitness. And that number is very, very specific to individuals. I wouldn't throw that out as everybody's number. I just know me well enough to know like, where is my heart rate usually for a given power? So if it's like, oh, my power is at like normalized 165 and my heart rate's 130, like that's a good place for me to be. And again, power is very, very specific to a lot of factors. So I wouldn't just port that onto you, but you should know generally what that gap looks like for you. And so I've been seeing like, wow, my power is pretty good. My heart rate's pretty low. That gap is wide. Whereas if I'm under a lot of stress or if I'm just not in really good bike shape, maybe I'm going to be at like 140 heart rate for 165 normalized power, for example. So seeing that gap and seeing my heart rate stay low even when I'm pushing a little bit has been really interesting. And again, I haven't done an FTP test recently. I haven't done anything super high intensity, but using how your heart rate responds to zone 2 workouts is actually a pretty good way to gauge your fitness. Because if it's spiking all over the place and you're probably going a little bit too hard, you might be a little bit too grounded in your numbers from last season. But I just know that I'm surprised to see that my zone 2 numbers now are pretty solid, even though I haven't done a lot of training. So I definitely attribute that to strength.
We're a strength podcast, actually.
I know. Yeah, we're like a life podcast, a strength podcast. That's our broader reflection on the podcast, is that we are not actually an endurance podcast anymore. So you can turn it off. Like if you're here for the endurance, we have nothing to say about that.
Forget it. Yeah, forget it.
All right. Jim, on to you. It looks like your first insight has to do with strength, kind of, and endurance.
Oh, yeah, it does. Okay, so you brought up skiing here before. And so, yeah, it's up here in the Upper Valley. I've had a chance to get out and do some Nordic skiing. And I'm just reminded that Nordic skiing is incredible moderate aerobic development and multi-directional glute to leg strength exercise. And so, like you said up front, if you can get out and do some Nordic skiing, go for it. I feel it's a little bit like trail running in the sense of like it organically builds your aerobic capacity in your leg and your glute strength. And I think it's particularly helpful that with like most runners and triathletes, like we're sort of this north oriented. When I say north, they think about the points on the compass, like we're always moving just in one direction, which is forward, sort of I call that north. And we rarely go east, west, or south. And so Nordic skiing is great because it's all about going north, east, and west. So yeah, shout out if you get a chance to go Nordic skiing, substitute it in for any one of your workouts. It's phenomenal workout.
Yeah, I love that. I actually learned to Nordic ski. I guess it was probably like 4 or 5 years ago now. I had a background in, I knew how to downhill ski, but hadn't done Nordic before. And something that I noticed if you're new to it is that especially for skate skiing, it is so hard to keep your heart rate down, to keep it in like zone 1, 2. For me, it always kind of has been this Z3 plus activity. And I think that's interesting because it's just forced me to sort of modify my week a little bit more where that's going to be the high intensity workout of the week. I'm curious, Jim, if you find that like you can get to this Z1, 2 place, or is it just the type of sport that's such high output that you're always going to be in a higher zone?
Yeah, it really depends on where I'm skiing. So if it's a flat area, what I've been noticing recently is that because mostly it's been we haven't had a lot of snow. So when you get a little bit of snow at the beginning of the season, it's usually golf courses. So either between the Hanover golf course or the Woodstock golf course. It's pretty flat. So the first ski I went out definitely was, high zone 2, low zone 3, just because I just wasn't used to being on my skis. Next time I went out, I think my average heart rate was like 135. And then, so now what I've been going out and focusing on is saying, okay, I can focus on going higher, doing, maybe some interval type of stuff, maybe working on my upper body a little bit. But I've also been able to go out and do a little bit of zone 2. But again, I started skiing like decades ago. And so I'm also really lucky. So if you're a beginner skier, yeah, your heart rate's going to go to zone 3, zone 4. That's fine. That's totally fine. And it's a total body workout. So don't stress about it if you can't get in zone 2. It's very rare that, if you put in a bunch of years, you can probably get the low zone 2, but otherwise don't stress about it.
It's kind of like swimming, where in the beginning with swimming, like no matter what, it's a zone 3, 4, 5 workout because you're just trying to stay afloat because it's a totally new thing. You don't know how to do it efficiently. But I have noticed I'm at least a little bit better at getting efficient now than it was. So we're not a Nordic skiing podcast, but if it's something that you already do or that you're thinking about, I think that can be a fun challenge for the winter. And especially if you have late season races, like mix it up in January, February, because you don't want to be doing just one bike run forever. It's too much.
Yeah, and it's also a great way to do some upper body fitness. I think it's really hard when you get into swimming. Swimming is obviously all body fitness and it's upper body fitness. But so skiing is a way that I wouldn't say you can substitute a ski for a swim, but certainly it's one of the other sports where you can actually get like a full body and upper body fitness workout.
Love it. Good to know. All right, next insight.
Okay, so this time of year where we're doing lots of testing, or some people were doing some testing. I think I mentioned last podcast, like I like to avoid testing, but some people want to do testing. And so it's brought to my attention that some folks were doing the ramp test in Zwift for their functional threshold power. And I think there's just all kinds of problems with the ramp test. I've done them in the past. And yeah, I would say just, for many, many reasons, skip the ramp test and go right to the one in Zwift. It's a 73 minutes one. And there's a little bit of gotchas here because there's this whole thing with, versus erg mode versus not erg mode. So what will happen with this 73-minute Zwift FTP test is that you'll do a warm up and erg mode will be on because it's reading your FTP and it's governing the resistance based upon that. But then there's 2 tests within this FTP. There's a 5-minute all-out test and there's a 20-minute test. And so when you go to the 5-minute test, in the 20-minute test, erg mode actually goes off automatically. You don't need to worry about this. But at that point, what happens is you have to start shifting your bike. And I recently had an athlete who did this and they weren't aware they had to shift their bike. So they spun out the whole time for the 5 minute, 20 minute. They're like, what's going on? My FTP is all weird. And I spun out and I was like, oh, you have to change gears. And he goes, oh, I was afraid to change gears because we're always talking about, you don't have to change gears when you're in erg mode and doing this and doing that. So just here to call it out that if you are doing the FTP test, is that will be a combination of erg on, erg off. Erg on, you don't need to shift, but erg off, go for it. And then my other point here is that the 5-minute test is really there to sort of burn off some anaerobic power so that your 20-minute power is more accurate. It's more aerobic based. And so for the 5-minute one, I would say, some little advice is to use the first 1 or 2 minutes to kind of go hard, but not all out. And then the last 3 minutes kind of go all out like you're trying to win a mountain stage race in the tour. And then for the 20-minute one, I would say start, spend 3 to 5 minutes sort of working on something that's kind of hard and maintain that kind of hard, and then use the last 15 minutes to kind of work even harder. And eventually your FTP will come out to where it should be. And again, you can always tell your coach like afterwards, like, oh, I either felt great or I felt fantastic. We can play around with FTP. We always talk about FTP just playing like center field, like it's going to change on a day-to-day basis based upon like how you're feeling, your hydration status, stress status, that kind of thing. So don't stress too much about it. But anyway, I just want to call out that don't do the RAM test, do the long 20-minute test in Zwift, and then we'll deal with all the details after that.
Yeah, no notes on this. And I do have to say, I've been thinking about actually doing an FTP test because I do believe that I shouldn't make my athletes do anything that I won't do. And I have programmed so many FTP tests in the last 2 weeks that I'm like, oh, maybe I should do one. So stay tuned. I'm saying this out loud for accountability purposes. Once this gum is healed, once we get through the holidays, once I survive the rest of 2024, I am coming for an FTP test.
And you're going to do it on your road bike or on your TT bike? How are you going to do it?
So my road bike does not live on the trainer. My TT bike lives on the trainer because I live in a 5th floor walk up. So my road bike remains my, like, if I get a good weather day outside. The jury is out on whether I'll actually do it in aero or not, which seems like very cruel and unusual punishment. But honestly, I would just say if I even start the thing, that's the win. Just like if you get in the pool, if you start that FTP test, that's the win. So I'll report back in the new year once we see how that shakes out.
That's true. Yeah, I haven't done it in a long time either. And I keep threatening to go do one outside because I'm too chicken to do one inside. So we'll see.
Awesome. All right, last insight.
Okay, last insight is that we have folks who are starting to swim, get to the back of the pool, or they're beginning to swim. And so just some advice here is that we talked about this before. Just do a lot of technical 50s. And if you are a new swimmer, what I recommend doing is that I put some links here, but basically you want to do is you want to go to the pool, you want to get a pair of fins, and you want to kick on your back on the way down and just do a bunch of 50s, just down and back, kicking on your back. That has become like the magic teaching swimming tool. It allows you to get comfortable in the water. It allows you to sort of get the right position. And again, I've linked here some of the how to kick on your back. But really, I would just start by just doing a lot of kick on your back and then start going kick on your back, 25 down, and then turn over and start working on freestyle catch up on the way back again, just with fins. And so really the focus this time of year is catch up stroke, a quiet head, and entering in line with your shoulder and pulling back in line with your shoulder. And again, I put some videos in here, and I've also put some recommendations here for folks to follow who put out regular good content on triathlon swimming. And I say triathlon swimming specifically because you don't necessarily always want to follow swimmers, because what we do as open water swimmers, triathletes, is often very, very different than what swimmers do.
Awesome. Yes. And just a plug to always check out our extended show notes because there's a lot of links in here, just like Jim was talking about. And this episode in particular has links basically throughout. So please check that out on our website. They're also linked in the show notes on whatever platform that you're listening to. There's a lot of good content in there. And actually, Jim, I see we have one more insight.
We have one more, which is it's a holiday season. Don't stress about fitness during the holiday season. We were actually just talking before we hit record and just saying like, hey, it's December. Like anything you do now is really just like kind of bonus time. So don't stress about it. Holidays, have a good time with family and friends, do some fun stuff, get crazy, and then we'll get back to business in January 1st. Or January 2nd, because January 1st, take that day off too.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've been looking at like January 5th, 6th time because it's like a weird week with January 1st. So most of my athletes are actually starting kind of around the 6th, and that's totally fine. Anything right now, like we said, is bonus. So really, if you didn't remember anything from the first part, just take this to heart. Don't stress about fitness during the holidays.
That's exactly right. Just skip to this part here. Okay, so the assignment today, I'll tell people, the assignment was, Katie said we should do a podcast on lessons from 2024. And I was like, that sounds like a great idea. And then I started writing down all my lessons for 2024. And I realized that what I was doing was looking forward to 2025. So it was kind of two different. We approached the assignment very differently. Katie had some very, very thoughtful lessons from 2024, which I'm going to say, yes, those are lessons. So I think you've done a great job capturing a lot of what we've learned in 2024. And then mine are much more like tactical, like here's what I want to do in 2025. So you might see a little difference between some of Katie's ones and some of mine. I think, Katie, you had the right call in terms of completing the assignment correctly, shall we say.
Well, I think that's what makes us a good team, Jim. And I will say, I just had a lot of time to do this because I've been like sitting in my bed with an ice pack on my face for the last 3 days. So I had a lot of time to think about everything that we've learned in 2024. And I will say, actually, a lot of these are actually distilling specific episodes that we've done. So that's been fun to kind of find the episode that is the 1 hour version of the minute that I'm going to talk about each thing here. But I think with the reflection of time, I've been able to just add a little bit of nuance to some of these points. So I don't know, without further ado, should I start us off with our lessons from 2024?
Let's kick it off. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll say too, this is actually Lessons from 2024 part 2, because we did a Lessons from 2024 part 1 in, I believe, June, when we were at the halfway point of the podcast. So if you're looking at what we learned from January to June, you should just check out that episode. We will link it in the show notes. But this is kind of everything that happened after that, as well as what spilled into earlier parts of the year. So first one is called Mindset Matters. And this should not really surprise anyone who's been listening to this podcast or who knows anything about us or about triathlon or really about anything. It's an obvious one. But I wanted to talk about it because I have reflected on mindset in the context of my A race this year, which we have an episode where I recap that. I did the Sea to Summit triathlon over the summer. And if you're new to the podcast or you haven't listened, in one line, what happened is that I, went in with some expectations about winning the race, doing well, etc. I got lost really, really early on into the race and lost about 20 minutes, moved to the back of the field, and then had to decide whether to keep going, knowing that I wasn't going to win, or just quit and go home. And I decided to keep going. I decided I'm doing this for me. It doesn't really matter what happens. And then actually had one of the best days of my life in a race, ran my way to the front and finished first. And it's interesting because I thought about how there was this crazy thing that happened where I got lost and I had to actively choose to race for me without chasing any outcome. And I thought about it a lot, and I actually work with a mindset coach. And I remember pretty soon after the race, I met with this mindset coach, and I was like, I walked into the Zoom room and I'm like, Will, guess what? And I told him everything that happened. And I thought he was going to be like, oh, you unlocked it. You're so smart. You got this. You did great, like validation, etc. And he just said, can you replicate that? And I think I realized, wow, I don't actually know if I could replicate that mindset if I wasn't forced into it by some crazy thing happening where I took a wrong turn and I lost 20 minutes. But at the same time, I think it's really true that your very best races come from a position of racing truly for you and knowing that you're choosing to race and want to be there regardless of the outcome, and or that your goal is to perform the best that you possibly can on any given race day, independent of what anyone else does. So anyway, I've been thinking about his question, can you replicate it, for many, many months now. I'd like to say that my goal for next season is that I want to be able to use that mindset, both in training and in racing, without being forced into it by some random circumstances. And I think it helps that I know I have it in me because it happened before, but I think it's just going to take a lot of effort to get there. And I want to be able to help athletes too, to really understand what is my why in training and racing, being really intentional about it, and then living that out kind of every day. And we've talked about different strategies for trying to do that a little bit better. I mean, it's taking Strava breaks, which I'll talk about later. It's really, really grounding in the intention of the workout and listening to your body. But yeah, I want to be able to answer that question and say, yeah, I can replicate it. And mindset does matter a lot, but I'm still kind of figuring out exactly how.
Yeah, it is really interesting too, because I think, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you started the race, you're more intrinsically thinking, right? About the exterior stuff. And then this intrinsic moment happened where it's like, okay, I need to now race for myself. And I think we talked a little bit about this in the Justin Ross episode, which we can list here, but this whole, external factors versus internal factors really seem to came into play here. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think often, probably my motivations for racing are a combination of extrinsic and intrinsic motivations. But in this case, I had to go from what was probably almost entirely extrinsic into what was almost entirely intrinsic. And that shift happened really fast. It happened like standing on the side of the road 20 minutes away from where I was supposed to be. But I do think it showed me kind of the power of that type of mindset and how that can actually be a very calm day and a very fun day and a very just steady day where you're not getting wrapped up in a lot of the emotionality of it. So it'll come back to kind of practicing those strategies in order to ground in intrinsic motivation. But I think if that's the starting point, that's one of my big goals for 2025 is like be intrinsically motivated. And so when we break that down into process goals, it helps to work with a mindset coach, and it helps to journal about how you're approaching your races and asking yourself the big why questions. So I think I have some of the tools in place. I'm going to have to act very, very hard on them because I don't think it's going to work to purposefully get lost in my next iteration of Sea to Summit. I don't intend to do that, but I don't know. Maybe that's the secret and we're totally screwed if that's the case.
Yeah, in your race sims, you're like, okay, I got to get lost for 20 minutes. And then we're going to like at the endurance drive, we do things very, very differently. We really screw things up at the very, very beginning, and then we get right back on track. It's amazing how it works. So
yeah, we as coaches come in, we slash a tire, we run out, we hide behind a bush. It's just, we want to put the adversity in so that people are ready to be intrinsically motivated.
Right. Well, this reminds me too, like, I just think that racing is, we talk about this as, racing is this expression of ourselves. And we're just really creating this unique experience, from ourselves, but also for ourselves on race day. And I just think that sometimes the way I think about this is that this is the day I get to create something that's just for me. Like, I'm the only person who can create what I'm going to create today because I have a unique story. Everybody here also is creating what they're creating that today. It's like almost this piece of art, and none of us are going to actually create the same thing. We've sort of given the same raw materials, but at the end of the day, when we put all of our quote statues on display at the end of the day, they're all going to be totally different. And sometimes for myself, I have to remember that, like, hey, this is for me, from me. This is an expression of who I am, and nobody else here has that experience. Only I have that experience.
And similarly, you're probably the one who cares the most. I always kind of think like, do people actually even care? And maybe they might care for the 1 second that it takes them to give you kudos on Strava, and then they're going to not think about it anymore. And so really like make that race for the person who cares the most about it, which at the end of the day is you. You're the one that's put the work in. You're the one that's been thinking about it every single day since you signed up or before. And I don't know, as I'm saying that out loud, maybe that's the path, is just saying like, who really cares? Who cares the most? And race for that person. And that's like, whoa. That person is you. And it gets all meta and spiritual. So here we are, back to spirituality.
Yeah, no, I love that when people say like, I love the lesson of like, who's paying attention to you? The answer, nobody. It's just,
they said you, right?
It's just you. It really is just you. How we all live in our heads, right? Oh my God, this really matters so much. And you realize nobody else is really paying attention at all. Like you say, oh yeah, maybe they hit a kudos and just kept going on and on, but nobody else is paying attention. And they shouldn't, because as humans, there's a lot going on in the world, and you have so much going on in your head. Like, it's a full-time job to keep your own squash together. So that's why nobody else is thinking of anybody else, because the full-time job is living in your head and trying to live your life. That's it. Like, there's no more headspace beyond that.
Totally. Yeah. And if someone else cares a ton about your specific outcome goal, like, I don't know if that's actually a good thing. I think as coaches, our job is to care about the human racing and care about the process. Like, obviously, we care a ton about that. And we're going to spend a little bit more time thinking about your race, but it's all from a point of supporting you as a human. So if you feel like you're surrounded by people who are putting those pressures or expectations on you, I think that was often where the external focus has come with me, is like feeling like, oh, there are people who actually care and might say something. Just tune that out. It's so hard to do. It is way easier said than done. But I think that's at least a starting point, because it's not, I mean, there are people that will do that type of thing, and sometimes that can shake your confidence to begin with. But those people don't matter. It's like, if they matter, they don't mind. If they mind, they don't matter. Something like that. I always butcher like whatever the common trope is on this.
So what I say is, you don't feel pressure from the podcast sponsors, Nature's Bakery, to go out and perform and win races. Is that what you're saying?
I'm trying so hard for Nature's Bakery, and I don't know, we still haven't reached out to them. But actually, I do want to share a quick aside. And once again, this can be a way longer episode than we intended, but we had a podcast listener reach out to me recently and said that she was on the T in Boston and saw a toddler having a complete meltdown until the dad came over and brought out a Nature's Bakery fig bar and gave it to the kid, and the kid totally calmed down. And I was like, yeah, that's even better advertising than our podcast. I don't know what to say to that. Like, we are going to get put out of the advertising business. So
that's right. It goes back to my best parental advice is bring snacks. That's all you really need to do. Change them, hold them, bring snacks.
I love it. Okay, so that's enough on that part of mindset, but I have a related lesson for my next one, and it all has to do with kind of cultivating belief. And I do want to call out here episode 51, Cultivating Self-Belief in Sport and Life, where we talk about this topic in great detail. But I think the really important thing that everyone should be remembering in a life context as well as an endurance context is that our expectations really do create our reality. And I think we know this in terms of our mindset, but something I've been thinking about a lot more recently is actually how our mindset can influence our physiology, which I think is something interesting that comes through in the endurance context. So I'd love to do a whole episode kind of on this type of research, this type of perspective, but I'm just going to give a high level overview of some of the research that I do with a lab at Stanford called the Mind and Body Lab. And basically what we study is how our mindsets shape not only our motivations and our intentions, but actually what our bodies can do and how they perform. And a lot of the research in that lab has been associated more with like health, but we're expanding now into this fitness space and the endurance space, which has been really, really interesting. But just to tell you a little bit about what this kind of research shows, there's this famous milkshake experiment that I guess I would say my boss, but my principal investigator, the lab leader, this amazing professor, Ali Crum, did. And she gave people 2 milkshakes at 2 different points in time. And the first milkshake, they said, was this sort of like sensible shake. It was 140 calories. It was low fat, low sugar. They drank the shake, and then they took a blood sample. So that was all the experiment entailed. Another point in time, they came in, they had this other shake. It was this decadent 600 calorie shake or whatever. They took a blood sample, they walked away. The point of the experiment was to measure levels of the hunger hormone ghrelin, which basically gets secreted after we eat. And it tells us whether we've had enough food and we don't need to be hungry anymore, or if we actually didn't get enough food and we want to be a little bit hungrier. And what was really interesting was that after people had the Sensible shake, the 140 calorie shake, their ghrelin response said like, yeah, they're still a little bit hungry. That totally makes sense to us. And when they had this decadent milkshake version of it, they had this big response that said, they said, I'm not hungry anymore. I don't need any more food. The catch of this experiment was that the two shakes that these people had were actually identical shakes, the exact same calories, the exact same sugar. They just had different labels. And the reason I bring this up, it's a really clear example of how what we think is going to happen, our expectations and our mindsets about, in this case, what we're consuming, literally shape how our body releases different types of hormones and reacts. And I've thought a lot recently about how that's probably true when it comes to racing. So for example, if you go into an FTP test and right beforehand someone says, hey, we've run some numbers, your VO2 max is not that high. Like, just so you know, it's pretty low. My hunch is that your body is not going to produce the same power on that FTP test as it would if you said, hey, just so you know, we just ran some numbers and you have one of the best VO2 maxes we've ever seen. We think you're absolutely going to smash this. And I've thought about this kind of in the context of coaching too, and the self-talk piece, where as a coach, what we say to our athletes matters so much. And what we say to ourselves matters so much, because it's going to create the reality of what we're able to do. And again, to bring it back to Cedar Summit, I would say one of the most helpful things in my race was running up the Tuckerman Ravine Trail and saying, like, you are Katie Clayton and this trail was made for you. This race was made for you. Just go do it. And not letting a single inch of lack of confidence kind of come in. I am not always like that. Again, I think that was because I found that intrinsic motivation somewhere, but I've just been trying to tell athletes, like, don't let that self-doubt creep in, at least in the race. And if you find that that happens a lot, you've got to start cultivating strategies to avoid it. And I think my role as a coach, I mean, Jim, you probably experienced this too, is like, sometimes athletes really do struggle with that self-belief and that self-confidence, and that's so normal. But sometimes we can be the first person to bridge into like, hey, I think you're really capable and I think you could really, really smash this race. And I don't just say that as a coach, I say that when I actually believe it. And I believe that the people who put the work in can absolutely smash it. But I don't know, I've just been thinking so much more about this full type of mindset and messaging, how we can kind of cultivate it, because I think that's a hack to the very best performances in our athletes and probably in ourselves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of the such a huge value of having a coach, or just really anybody who sort of sits a little bit outside of you and sees the bigger picture. And so, like you say, when we say, "Hey, I think you're going to smash," like for example, like your marathon, people say, "Hey, I think this is my pace," and you're like, "I think you can go way beyond that," because we've seen you now, we've seen this transformation, we've seen this maturization, and we've seen other people sort of in the similar situations, exceed their goals as well too. So, yeah, I think it's a huge part of it, and I think confidence is a huge issue. I've been thinking a lot about confidence this year. And just for me personally, like, it's interesting because a lot of triathletes are very ambitious people. We're very high performers. We're high achievers. And there's a big difference between being an ambitious person and being a confident person. And I think a lot of times you can be ambitious. And yes, there are probably many things that you are very confident about, but there's also probably many things you are not confident about. And I think eventually that will get exposed in some way. I think endurance sports will kind of bring that out a little bit of like, yes, I'm very confident over here and very ambitious over here in this part of my life, but am I really that confident doing this? And so it really helps to have a coach or somebody else or a friend or maybe just to say, hey, yeah, you are really good at this and you can do this. Because I know a lot of times for myself, I'm like, I don't know, can I do that? I don't really feel that confident. But I think from someone from the outside would say, that person's really ambitious and they seem really confident with lots of things, but it doesn't apply. I guess the thing is, confidence doesn't apply across the board. There are very specific places where maybe it's high and very specific places where it's very low.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think confidence is something that you kind of build over time. You have to put the reps in of like trying something and proving to yourself that you can do it. And that's actually what's really helpful about following a training plan, I think, especially when the workouts get hard, is like if you have done a full VO2 max on the bike progression, I think you build a little bit of confidence every single time that you do it. And we talked about too how self-belief is a muscle in your brain where like just showing up and giving it a try, even if you quote fail or something like that, does make it a little bit easier the next time. So maybe our challenge to everyone for 2025, as well as what we've seen in 2024, is like put yourself in situations where you are not comfortable. I talked recently about how like taking a lot of rest was something that used to be not comfortable for me. And now this whole week of the gum surgery, I've been like, I can only Zwift. Like, that's fine. I don't really care. It's totally fine. I'm still enough. I like my frozen peas on my face and that's fine. Everything's totally fine. So you can build that muscle in kind of any domain. And for a lot of people, that will be hard workouts, but just give it a try and your coaches are your partners. And yeah, and we believe in you. We really do. We're not making it up when we say that we really care.
Absolutely.
All right, this translates super nicely into my next lesson, which is that this year I personally, as well as with my athletes, have done a lot of more targeted goal mapping. So in the show notes, I have linked our goal mapping worksheet if anyone wants to do some of their own goal mapping, as well as episode 49, where we go through the process of setting goals in training and racing. And I also wanted to call up something that Elena said just in last week's episode on how we should all have big goals loosely held. The idea that it's totally okay to set a wildly ambitious, big, and scary goal, but it's okay if it doesn't work out. And it's almost just the setting of the goal process that is what you're here to do rather than making sure that you actually achieve it. And related to that, the importance of setting down an A goal, a B goal, and a C goal so that you can roll down them if something comes up or if you don't have the day that you were looking for. I wanted to share a small sub point on that because I've actually pushed athletes to do this a lot recently. And I've had a lot of athletes come to me with A goals related to like a place in a race, something like, oh, I really want to finish in the top 10 in my age group. One tweak I will say as a coach is I actually usually recommend mapping those goals onto some sort of time, which you can do by looking up times for the top 10 in like previous iterations of this race. But it's tough because, we can train to perform at a goal pace, but we can't control who shows up on race day. And remember, you can have like a quote slow or bad day, bad for you, and finish second in your age group, or you can smash a personal best and finish 11th. Think carefully about what matters more to you. So as you are figuring out your big goals loosely held and your A, B, and C goals, just think about maybe some time stuff rather than place stuff. But also, A, B, and C goals don't even have to be related to numbers. That's also something I've thought a lot more about, where the goal, for example, of crushing your fueling or having a positive mindset or crossing the finish line smiling, all of that is really, really important. And that can be an A goal. And it's especially important to think about those goals for my last point, which is that you don't always have to be like better than last year in terms of time or better than a previous version of yourself. Because sometimes when the life overhead changes or the LSS, we've talked about this before, life stress score changes, even just maintaining your fitness or hitting like 6 hours a week of training can be a huge A goal. So it's just super important to be realistic about what your life overhead is in a given year or season. Are you moving? Are you starting a new job? Are you taking on new responsibilities in work, in family? Are you starting a family? And then ask yourself what kinds of races and goals are appropriate for a change in that life overhead. Because I think we very much underestimate how much like life stress can really impact our ability to achieve our goals. And then that just takes the fun part out, that takes the recreation out of these recreational sports. So really, really important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I really there's some really good points here, especially your last point here, which is this idea of like periodizing your life and being able to sort of step back a little bit and say, yeah, this is a period where traditionally I'd love to be fast, this year or something, but we're gonna have a baby or whatever, or like you say, starting a new job, and so saying, okay, for the next X number of years, this period of time, I'm gonna call it out. This period of time is going to be focused on, for example, like just like wellness, right? And so that has nothing to do with fitness. It's totally separate. It's the bottom of the pyramid, if you will, for us, wellness. And say, I'm going to figure out how to maybe do, right, say 5 or 6 hours a week, but make it sustainable through this period of time when I'm starting a really super busy job or medical school or being a parent.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like again, 4 or 5 hours a week, you're definitely hitting like the American Heart Association requirements for exercise. You're probably exceeding those by a lot. And so it doesn't have to be your Ironman build. And honestly, no one should be doing an Ironman every single year of their life forever and ever. We see that sometimes. And I don't actually think that's the very best path to wellness, for example. So let your life unfold as it does, figure out what's realistic in your sport. But then this actually segues right into my next point, which is that comparison is the thief of joy. And I think it's so common in these settings to compare to a previous version of what we were. Like I go back and look at like, okay, well, where was my fitness 1 week before my A race of previous years where my goal was to qualify for Kona? And like, I was strength training, but my fitness is not where it was then, for sure. It's definitely going to be different. And I think, there's 2 different types of comparison that we see a lot, and it's very, very common in our community. One of those is comparing yourself to others, so seeing on Strava what people are doing. But I think an even bigger part is comparing to ourselves. And frustratingly, I would say Strava has made that easier and easier in that now it like flashes up like, hey, look how fit you were a year ago. Look at what you were doing on this day. And you were out in the mountains and you were crushing it. And I'm like, okay, yeah, well, now I'm like in my bed with the frozen peas. Like that's kind of sucks. And then similarly, there's like the Strava AI, which we've bashed on before, is like, yeah, this was okay, but it was slower than your average. And you're like, Strava has no idea what my life overhead is right now. And the fact that I even got outside and moved my body today is a really, really big deal. So I have said this probably a million times both on this podcast and previous podcasts, but when this comparison stuff is coming up and it's when it's making you feel bad about yourself, number one, use less data. Number two, take a break from Strava. Number three, turn inward and just ask what your body needs and think about what the intention of any workout is. And then finally, just try to come back to really big core values that I think so many of us in this community share, which is joy. We are doing this for fun, for community. We need to text a friend. We need to reach out and do something with someone. But I just think it's so common and it makes me sad to see this in athletes. And I know I do it myself. So maybe an intention that we can kind of all share for 2025 is not letting comparison be the thief of joy and do the best to just kind of do what we can on any given day for the very best version of ourselves. Because I fundamentally believe that everyone is doing the best that they can. And sometimes the best that they can looks so different on one day versus 1 year versus any other day.
Yeah, I agree. We want to focus on that. Yeah, like you say, joy, health, community, play, make it play. Keep the recreation and recreational athlete. Who cares about what you did? And it's actually interesting because people say, oh, I'm not as in shape this year as I was last year. And it's funny. It turns out a lot of times they're surprised that they're actually faster, like the less hours the next year. Why? Is because you're just building this huge lever. Like every year builds on top of every year. Builds on top of every year. So maybe you've been an athlete who's been competing for a while and you've been layering on a ton of aerobic fitness and racing and done Ironmans and all the big stuff for the last 5 years. And then suddenly year 6, you're like, yeah, I got 5 hours this week and most weeks. And you're like, but you know what? That athlete could be faster just because they've got a really, really long lever and they just leveraged everything they've done. So I think a lot of times, I know for myself, like I'll just look very narrowly, oh, what was it last year? And I forget like the last 20 years which I've been training. I'm like, oh, okay, wow, that's actually means something. So it is easy to compare. We live in this comparison society, but I often find you often just get faster even with less hours. And so if you feel like, oh, I'm bummed out, I'm not in shape, like you're probably in much better shape than you actually think you are.
Yeah. And I think too, even if you're not, you have to think about what are the most important things to actually compare across 2 points in time. It's like, sure, you can look at your threshold, your FTP, for example, your threshold run pace. How about how happy were you at these 2 different points in time, or how well were you sleeping, or how much were you giving back to other people, or what impact were you making on the world? And sometimes you're like, yeah, well, I was super fit, but I was really unhappy. I was probably underfueled. I was not sleeping well, and I only cared about myself. I think we see that a lot, especially in the very elite athlete population. And it's like, yeah, on paper, if the only 2 data points that you're going to take are FTP, yeah, the former athlete might have a higher FTP, but the athlete that's giving back to their community and is actually kind of happy in life, I think that counts for something. And it's just so much harder to capture in numbers, which is all the reason to kind of take those numbers away. But I don't know, since we've migrated from being an endurance podcast to a life fulfillment podcast, I'd like to think that even if the numbers are down for us or for anyone else, there are other buckets that are a little bit better. And it's all about kind of just putting different water in different buckets at different times.
Yeah, I think one of the best things this podcast has done is said, okay, we're all endurance athletes. We all want to do well. We all want to race well, but life is just a lot bigger than that. And so I think we just brought a much wider lens to endurance sports and endurance training than most coaches and most athletes and most podcast or media outlets really look at. So I think we've gone pretty wide. We appreciate folks who have come with us along on that journey because we're just people at the end of the day.
Totally. And if you actually do hate this, just go back to episode 2, zone 2 training. It's 30 minutes long. It is principles only, and I'm sure you'll love it. Okay. I have 3 more. This is going to be a long episode, but I think we have license to do whatever we want because it's probably the last episode of 2024. So the next one is stress is stress / the body keeps the score, which was something that actually did come up in our last episode. And I also encourage folks to check out episode 22 way back in the archives, which was all about life stress score, which I was just talking about. To distill this into a couple sentences, I increasingly see in athletes now, and I see in my own life, that the body interprets stress from life stuff, work stuff, training, racing, etc., all in the same way. And there is only so much stress you can be under at a given time before the body really starts to shut you down. And this is something that I've seen kind of as I've gotten a little bit older. I think, maybe in my college years, I was a little bit more resilient to stress than I am now, but especially some of the older athletes that I coach, it takes not too much to really feel like you're getting at the tipping point. And I find that if you push this to the extreme, it really can come back after you with things like chronic disease, inflammation, all this bad stuff that just shows that the body's kind of keeping score. So the short piece of advice to respond to this is that when LSS is high, TSS, training stress score, must come down. You can do that by reducing volume. You can do that by reducing intensity. It's really, really important to keep your coach informed just about kind of what's going on. It doesn't have to be the specifics. It's just like, hey, my life stress is really, really high right now. And then we can help kind of turn the dials and help give you permission to do that. Because I think people often struggle with the ability to give themselves permission to take rest. But the sooner that you do that, the faster it will happen. You just have to wait for those metrics to kind of come back under control, look at your resting heart rate, look at your HRV, sleep quality and quantity, et cetera. And even more importantly, just see when you start to feel better. That'll be the very fastest way to get back on track. But just keep in mind that even though you don't get the same Strava credit for it, life stress matters in the exact same way in your body.
Yeah, and this also reminds you too, like back to the sort of goal mapping we talked about. Like, we have this intention at the beginning of the year, like I'm going to do this and tackle that, and we're all excited about 2025. We're going to do all these big races, but then we may end up with this period of time where LSS is really high for maybe something that came out of left field. And I know we've had every year we have folks who've always come to me and say, I feel bad because my life got busy and I can't do this and then that. My LSS is really high. Now I have to change. Can we change to some other event? And I'm like, of course, let's change away. Let's go for it. You have permission. Like keep the recreational athlete. Let's keep this playful. Let's find some solution to, like you say, the LSS is high, bring the TSS down. Let's find a different race. Let's find something else that is fulfilling and will be a goal for you, but it doesn't have to be necessarily the original goal. Like there's no reason to be attached. I mean, yes, we're attached to the original goal and we're working hard after it, but that's not attainable. That's fine. Let's just change and do something else.
Big goals loosely held, just like we said.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. Okay, 2 more from me right here. First one, sports nutrition is the 1%, everyday nutrition is the 99%. So this insight is something I see often in athletes, and it came up in our episode with registered dietitian and performance chef Megan Chakosky. That's episode 53. I dropped it in the show notes. But I think as athletes, we spend a ton of time optimizing our sports nutrition with like the perfect gel and the perfect carb mix. But we maybe spend less time thinking about the other 99% of our fueling. So like, what are you eating for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and your snacks? And I think while it's really important to nail and practice your strategy in racing, you should probably be spending about as much time just being intentional about those other meals. And I'm not thinking about like, oh, well, you should be eating as clean as you can. It's more about just putting the intentionality into what is going to support my body and what I need to do. And at the end of the day, if your daily nutrition sucks, but you take 8 gels during your bike, you're not going to have the very best results ever. Even if you're hitting like your carb content, you have to be supporting it all around. So maybe the advice here is if you feel like you're not nailing the everyday nutrition, but you do have your sports nutrition dialed, you should check out a registered dietitian. A lot of our athletes did that in 2024, and it was awesome to see them feel just so much better in training once they got their everyday nutrition dialed. And we can link a couple of suggestions for people to reach out to that we've kind of interviewed on the podcast before. There's Kate Ward, but just highly recommend that as something to add to your toolkit for 2025. And kudos to folks that did it before.
Yeah, there's 2 legal performance enhancing drugs out there. And the first one is sleep. And the second one is good nutrition. And the problem is that somebody like, and not to pick on the feed, but you see a lot of things about the feed. They're talking about the 1%, the gels, the mixes and stuff. That doesn't mean anything. That means nothing really. I mean, yes, it does in terms of context in your race day. But again, it's even less than 1%. So it's hard to sell sleep and it's hard to sell eggs in the morning and cottage cheese and hummus and just good food, right? The things that exist on the outside aisles of the supermarket, right? That's really hard to sell.
Yeah, that's the thing that makes a difference for sure. Yeah, like performance enhancing drug, oatmeal, love it. Peanut
exactly.
Butter, let's go. Like that stuff matters so much. So,
but yeah, isn't there? Yes, I think every once in a while I hear there's some controversy out there and like about oatmeal and stuff, and they eat there, and I'm like, what are people talking about? It's goddamn oatmeal. Like eat it up. Like come on, man.
Oh my gosh, that's something that I've not found in different corners of the internet. I'm not trying to anytime soon. So let's keep that shut down for now.
Okay.
Okay, my last one. So this is called embracing the seasons of workout/training/life. And I've thought a little bit about how kind of my season and the seasons of many of my athletes unfolded over the course of the year. And I think there's something to be said for working with the seasons to structure your training, your racing and movement. Mainly because when we live in a place like New England, there are very clearly defined rules of what you can do in a given season and what you can't. Like in January, it is very rare that you can actually go for an outdoor bike ride in the Upper Valley, for example. You can be skiing, you can be Zwifting, you can be swimming, etc. But I really like that in the sense that I love to think about winter as a time to really just hunker down and get a lot of work done, get a lot of trainer time done, stick to base miles, everything, and get very much indoor fit. And then once spring comes around, you're like, oh, I can get outside. Now's the time for me to build outdoor durability. You've got those like brutal rainy April rides where you sort of can be outside, but you're mostly just building resilience data points, etc. You learn how to ride and run and open water swim long. You prep for your races. You dial in your mindset. It's a really busy time for athletes and coaches, but a really fun one. And then summer is sort of this like manic, happy, high intensity, joyous celebration of racing that results from the work that you put in during the winter and spring, the time that we've all sort of been waiting for as triathletes. And then finally, when you transition to fall, it's like, yes, you reap the benefits of your summer fitness. Maybe you have an amazing September, October of riding, but eventually you get to the point where you actually can rest and reset physically and mentally. And we're all sort of in that right now where any movement that we do is bonus. It's a great time to have a bunch of random things happen in your life that force you to rest a lot. Not that that has happened to me recently or anything, but something to be said for that. And I find that just like grounding in not being that nomadic and nesting a little bit and not having much of a scarcity mindset regarding outdoor time just allows you to fully surrender to that slower and secure pace that we need in order to prep for kind of the winter of training again. So all this is to say, I don't like intentionally plan for the seasons to unfold this way, but if I look at my last probably 5 years of serious training, they generally always do. And I'm looking forward to actually being intentional about that in the next year because it helps us understand not just the intention of the workout, but the intention of the season or the intention of the period that we're working on. And then finally, I will say, like, if you do have an A race that happens to be in December, there are some people that are racing 70.3 Worlds. Recently, there was Ironman 70.3 Indian Wells. There are a couple athletes there. That's okay too. Just know that your season may be a little bit unconventional with respect to your usual outdoor time and think about ways that we can play around with that. Whether it's having a well-timed camp or something like that, it's just going to be a little bit different. So when you can, work with the seasons, especially if you live in New England. And I think you can build really big fitness while doing that.
Yeah, I love the description of the periods of the year, right? They're four very distinct periods that we're in and what those mean and what they mean for life and what they mean for training. So yeah, thanks for summarizing those.
Yeah, of course. Well, that was a lot of Katie Blab. So I think we're going to move to Jim Blab right now about lessons from 2024. Do you want to kick it off?
So yeah, if you made it this far in the podcast, thank you. I'm going to kind of speed through mine a little bit because they're much more mundane sort of tactical stuff. So we're going to go a lot quickly through mine and then we'll get to the challenge of the week and gear of the week. Okay, so my first one is we talked about a little bit about fueling, and one thing that I'm psyched about for 2025 is this play around a little bit more with this high carb fueling during training and racing. And I'm going to do that during some of our race sims weekends. And I just think, this gut training, it's obviously a thing. We're hearing much more about this and these performances that are happening, running races and the pro peloton. So I think there's something to be said for training our gut a little bit more in 2025. And then along that same line, also, I'm really excited I bought some of that really expensive Martin, sodium bicarbonate. And I've heard this is a little bit dangerous, but it's like to try that out. And I've had some athletes actually who have tried that out recently and said it seems to be working. So anyway, doesn't be said that I've bought a lot of astronaut food from the feed recently, and I'm all stacked up and ready to go for 2025.
Awesome. Well, you do that. I'm going to have quick oats, and then we'll just compare notes and see how we felt after all that.
Right. Exactly. The second one here is, I think the biggest X factor we've seen this through, many, many years, but it seems to be getting worse and worse is heat during races. And so one thing I'm psyched to work on more this year is both passive and active heat training for folks, because, just as a coach, it's just terrible to see somebody work for, 6-9 months towards a race and then get to race day. And almost any race that's going to happen in the US, maybe even in Europe, June, July, August, it's just roll the dice. And what's happening more and more often now is you're showing up and the heat index is just so high on these days. So hopefully this year we'll get some heat training going regularly, and hopefully unlock some more success for folks.
I know we're trying to go quick, but I do have a quick story on this, or a thought of how I'm going to get more in the pool once I'm cleared to be back in the pool. So at my pool, there's a hot tub and there's a steam room. And usually I'm like, I only have time for my swim. I'm going to go do my swim. Now I've decided, what if for every swim workout, I actually put it in my training piece that's like 30-minute swim, 15 minutes in the hot tub, or 15 minutes in the steam room. And if it's for performance, I feel like I can totally justify doing it. So I'm actually psyched on making that part of my swim routine. And who knows, maybe it'll actually get me excited to be in the pool more times.
It'd be interesting too, if you're doing regular blood work, I wonder if you do like hematocrit, it'd be really interesting to see if that, it's going to make a difference. It's going to be positive. And it would be interesting to get some data around that as well too.
Ooh, yeah. I got routine blood work this week, so we know where we're starting from, and it'll be super interesting.
All right, great. Okay, so we're going to heat training. We're going to do a little bit more moderate. We're going to go zone 3, believe it or not. It's going to be something.
No way. Blasphemy, Jim.
I know, dangerous territory out here, but I'm just more and more convinced that there's benefit there. And we're already doing this already for a lot of our triathletes and for our runners as well too. But I think just a little bit more moderate running, and I'll put in there also progression runs as well too. So luckily, I mean, Katie, I don't know if you feel this, but I have a lot of athletes who this is their, second, third, fourth year with me. And so we're now able to, again, talk about that big lever, take that big lever and say, okay, the last thing you probably need right now is another 8-mile zone 2 run. But what you really do need is an 8-mile run with the last 20 minutes being at, say, half marathon pace. So I'm just feeling really lucky and fortunate that I've got a lot of returning athletes this year that we're going to really focus on speed, both on the bike and on the run. And I think we're going to treat some of our triathletes a little bit more like our pure runners this year with progression and more zone 3.
Yeah, I love that. I've been thinking exactly along that wavelength too. So stay tuned for something different than just the 8-mile zone 2 run, especially if you're like a level 3+ athlete.
Yeah, and also the other one here was even more hills. We're huge fans here, and I know that I have been rebuilding my run since my injury, and I'm using hills a lot. And I gotta say, it's just been a huge difference. And so we do a lot of hill stuff here. We do a lot of hill fartleks. One of our favorite workouts are to do hills and then do fast and flat as well too. So I've written some more workouts around that. So anyway, all this is just to say I have been scheming away and training peaks and writing more workouts, and it's been super fun. Also, and you mentioned up above here, which is mental training, which is, knowing the intention of the workout, developing some sort of mechanism to invoke our parasympathetic nervous system, whether that's breath work or meditation or therapy or mindfulness or whatever. But really that's a key as well, because we have the stimulus, which is the training, but we also need the recovery, the adaptation. It comes from the recovery. So you don't get faster when you go faster. You get faster when you actually recover from that faster session. Oh, and my new mantra around that is, it will be hard, but I am capable.
Ooh, I like that, but I'm going to give you a note, which is inspired by my therapist. It's not but, it's and. It will be hard and I am capable. 2 things can be true. So
even better. Okay, changing that. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Perfect. And my last one is, we developed this level 1 through level 5 athlete model focus this year, which is sort of a way of just capturing, the levels where people are at in terms of their athletic development. And so just sort of keeping that front of mind for 2025 and really, talking more and more about that. So as folks come through the door and they say, oh, I want to learn about triathlon, I'm like, great, we know level 1 athletes really well. Here's what it takes to graduate from a level 1 athlete, and really just being very specific about this, as opposed to just people coming and saying, oh, you signed up for a race? Great. That's perfect. Let's just go. So I don't know, maybe this is our attempt to sort of control the triathlon world in terms of, here are these levels and here's the things you should learn in these levels. But I really like this concept. And for me, personally as a coach, it just helps me to ground in something and to program around very specific skills and development. If I know an athlete, it's a level 1 athlete versus a level 3 athlete.
Yeah, no, I've loved this, and I've been using it a lot with my athletes. And I think thinking about how it's different to prep someone who's level 1 versus level 3 versus level 4, et cetera, has really colored how I think about training. So thank you for bringing that one to our podcast. And thank you too, Jim, for condensing all your lessons into like 4 minutes. That was incredible. Just wow. I'm so impressed.
We are efficient, but you had the right idea for that. I really enjoyed all your 2024. So those all captured, I think, a lot of the conversations that we've had on this podcast with you and me and you and Elena. So thank you for that great recap.
Yeah, the soliloquy, it was a lot. Okay, well, I think this brings us to our closing segments. Let's do a challenge of the week and a gear pick of the week. So my challenge of the week is a treat yourself challenge to get some body work done. So this can be a sports massage, sports chiropractor, PT, acupuncture. Sometimes the latter 3 actually can be covered by insurance, depending on what type of health plan you have. So definitely check that out. I've recommended Wellness in Motion in Boston before. They have locations all over the city for a lot of this type of stuff. And you don't have to be injured in order to do that. I find that this is just all part of establishing your local network of care providers. And, you might not be injured, but you could just be tight in an area. And if you keep pounding that, then it's probably going to lead to an injury down the line. So treat yourself to some body work. If you need a Christmas gift idea, ask someone to get you a gift card to like a massage place. It is also an amazing way to invoke that parasympathetic nervous system, to be forced to lie on a table for an hour. So I've done that a couple of times recently.
That's a great challenge of the week. My challenge of the week is okay, it's a little bit colder. We're out there exercising, whether you're skiing or whether you're running. But I've noticed for myself is I just won't drink as much. And I'll come back from, say, a ride and I'm like, I drank one water bottle over 2.5 hours. Like, that's not going to be good. So I end up playing catch up. So just a reminder that if you're out there exercising, especially for a long time in the cold, like just to drink more water or electrolytes or whatever that you'd like to drink out there.
Yeah, I need to take this to heart. I've been absolutely terrible on the hydration train recently, which I'm sure is not helping me recover from all these various things that have happened. So thank you for the challenge. I'm definitely going to do that. Okay, gear pick of the week, our last one of 2024. I'm going to recommend, if you're traveling, the Morph collapsible foam roller. And Jim, you and I actually both own this because we got it as a gift from the Dartmouth Triathlon team once for being their coaches, which was very, very sweet. But it's cool. It's this foam roller that collapses down flat, and then it has these two things that you pull out on either side to make it totally sturdy. You can put your whole body weight on there. But I just think it's great because you can throw it in a suitcase. And often, if you're traveling and you're really feeling super tight, you often don't have the equipment that you need in order to just roll out. So check out this foam roller. Great to put on your Christmas list if you need something for your recovery tools. And I mean, I think it's good enough that you could just use that as your primary foam roller if you just want to have one.
Yeah, it's funny. I ran across this the other day in my pain cave and I was like, oh, this thing. And then it's like, it really does lay down flat, but it's super beefy when it's together. So it's not some sort of like, oh, I'm sort of like poor stepsister of a foam roller. It's actually a real foam roller that really, where you say you can use this as a primary one. So yeah, I'm super impressed with this thing. My gear pick of the week is if you're looking for protein powder with a little bit more like vitamins, probiotics, and superfoods. Supposedly, I don't know, who knows all these things, but I've tried Kachava, and it's one of these subscription-based things where you can buy one at a time. But anyway, really like it a lot. And I put it in Greek yogurt, and it's this huge protein bomb. And I've been using it for sort of late afternoon snack. I found this, going back to nutrition, I found that I just get hungry, 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm not that old to eat, a dinner at 5 o'clock, or I'm trying to stave off that period of time. So I usually have a big bowl of frozen berries and Greek yogurt and Kachava, and it really fills me up.
That's awesome. My in-laws love Kachava. So there's a double endorsement there from them, from you. I feel like everyone's got to check it out.
Kachava.
Sweet.
Yep.
Okay. Well, what a way to end 2024. It has been absolutely real. We are going to take the day after Christmas off, I believe. And so our next episode will come out just as the new year is starting on January 2nd. So stay tuned. We will miss everyone in the process, but we hope everyone has an amazing holiday, and definitely drop us a rating or review if you want to give us a present, because we would really, really appreciate that. But honestly, just having people listen is big. And I don't think we ever expected that we get to this point as of 1 year ago. But yeah, thank you so much to everyone for listening, and we will see you next time.
Yeah, we saw some of those Spotify raps and we saw the endurance drive on the podcast. I'm like, whoa, that's us. Wait a minute. Hold on.
Who are those people? That's crazy.
What's up with that? So anyway, if you're listening up to this point, thank you very much. We appreciate everything you guys have done for us this year and contributed to our podcast. And thanks for being our community, and happy holidays. And as we always say, thanks, peeps.